I don't often say when this is happening, but it happens a lot and I'm stuck there this week. So here's where I'm at. Stories about damnation and hell and fire are really painful for me. And I get that they are told as part of our Bible stories because we are meant to be afraid of making hurtful and sinful choices in this life, that we are meant to understand that there are consequences for our actions. But because all of my adult life I have known that I was gay, and because a lot of my ministry work, both now and in previous settings, has been about trying to make a protected space for Christians who are also members of the LGBTQ plus community. These stories are hard because these stories have been used to frighten us, not out of behaving in ways that hurt others, but out of understanding our own sexual orientation or our gender identity. Anything other than being heterosexual and cisgender has been interpreted as something that can cause us to be put in eternal fire. So that's really hard. And I try to step out of that because I know that part of that is my own pain, and I try not to bring that to the text and to the sermon, but it's there this week. So I want to talk about it because that's where this story at least leads me to thinking. Is this story where Jesus is telling this parable of weeds and wheat, of good plants and bad, and how they'll all be harvested together and then separated, and the weeds will be good for nothing but fire. This story immediately makes me think, am I going to be found among the weeds? And I think stories about the kingdom to come and what happens after we die should make us think about our behavior and our choices in this life. But every fiber of my being rejects the idea that we should use those stories to isolate, reject, and condemn LGBTQIA plus people. And yet that's the first thing I think of. So I have to sit with these stories and wrestle around and think, how do I peel back the layers of how this story has been misused so that I can get down to the story of what Jesus is trying to tell. Jesus isn't trying to condemn the sinfulness of my being a gay woman. Jesus is trying to condemn other parts of me that are sinful and hurtful to other people, that wound or oppress, that cause pain, that cause harm. I have to get down to that part. I have to get back to the original meaning of this story. And this week where I really got stuck is, what if that's not the original meaning of the story? I mean, of course it is. Of course the original meaning is there are weeds and wheat, and we are going to talk about this life and the afterlife. But what if the original question that Jesus could hear in listeners' minds that prompted this parable, what if that question wasn't, where am I going when I die? What if that question was something different? Because I don't think that has to be the only way we read this story. I started thinking, what if the question that Jesus is trying to answer about the kingdom is, why is there still evil in the world? Because that's as pressing a question as where will I go when I die. To think that God, the creator of the universe, who liberated the children of Israel out of slavery in Egypt and walked them across the Red Sea on dry land, who spoke through Moses and through the prophets so that the chosen people could learn to live in harmony, compassion, justice, and peace with one another, the God who has come back to the people again and again and said, "Look, I made you, I have taken care of you, let us now take care of each other and of the poor and oppressed and widowed in your midst." When we believe that that God has come so close to us to put on skin and become the person of Jesus of Nazareth, why wouldn't we ask, if God can do that, why is there still evil? How is it that people met Jesus, met God face to face, and still walked away unchanged, still walked away putting themselves over other people, prioritizing wealth and worldly possessions over those in need? How is it that there are still weeds among the wheat? And maybe that's what this story is meant to answer. Maybe Jesus is trying to explain why we are still in a world that seems like such a muddle. We know that our Jewish siblings ask this question, that it was one of the reasons for not believing that Jesus could be the Messiah. The expectation was that the Messiah would usher in a new age in which a child of David, a descendant from the royal line of the kings of Israel, would be back on the throne, that oppressors and destructive powers would be overturned, that people's hearts would be turned, that everyone would turn to the ways of Zion, the holy city of Israel, and ask, how can we live in peace and harmony the way God taught you to teach us? And that didn't happen with Jesus. So perhaps Jesus is saying, no, just because I am here, just because the kingdom is near, just because we will teach that I am God in skin, does not mean that the world stops being a mix of good and bad. That's not for you, my servants, to worry about. The sower is the Son of Man, he explains in interpreting the parable. So maybe the servants are us, coming to him and saying, you planted, all you did was good. Everything that you started with was good, and yet something is still wrong in this world. And isn't that our cry so often? God, you are good. God, I have tried hard. Why is the world still broken? And God says, that is not only not your fault, but not your burden to carry. That is something that higher beings than us, or different beings at the very least, that the angels will take care of in an age yet to come. This is not my fault, as the sower, says God, nor your fault, my servants, my children, my disciples, my followers, my Christians. It's not your fault that the world is still a mess. There are powers, there are forces at work that are not just for good. And the world will continue to be a mess. The world will continue to take things that are beautiful and break them over its knee because they refuse to serve the powers that be, political, religious, monetary, whatever they may be. There are things that the world will take and say, how precious and beautifully is this made in the image of God, and then destroy it. Because there are things in this world that are still slaves to evil, still wrapped up and bound in self-preservation, self-centeredness, selfish ways, self-promotion, saying, what can I get? What do I want? Never, what does my neighbor need? So I wondered if I was just asking the wrong question to prompt this story as an answer. Not what will happen when I die, or when the age comes that is the next age. What will happen when Jesus returns to earth? What will happen in the next life, but rather, why in this life are things still not perfect? And Jesus says, I know, and it's not your fault, and it's not going to be your burden. Even so, Jesus, still in this story, speaks in such a binary way. There will be weeds and wheat at the end of the age, and the angels will gather the weeds into the barn, and they will be nothing but fuel for the fire, and those are the children of evil. And how we wish, really, that we could divide the world so neatly into two boxes, children of good and children of evil, and as long as you knew that you were in the first box, you're set. You're fine. And as long as you knew who was in the last box, you could stay far away from them. But we know that people are much more of a mess than easily fitting into boxes of good and evil. That as the Apostle Paul has been talking about in the past few weeks in his letter to the Romans, that people, even he, want to do better, but somehow still fail over and over again. This is why, for so many people within Protestant traditions, we lean on understanding that it is not a binary system that expects us to be either in this box or in this box, and if you are in the bad box, then you are doomed forever. But rather to understand that it is the work of God in Jesus to keep pulling us out of the box that seems wrong, pulling us out of the box of selfishness, pulling us back out of the box of cruelty, whether it is accidental or intentional, pulling us back out of the box and saying, you are my child. What are you doing? You are my child whom I have made and claimed for good. Do not let the ways of evil choke out the good in you. And I think to myself, if all that is true, if this is not a story about my own destiny, but what will happen or what will happen at the end of the age, but rather a story about why the world is still the way it is. And if this is not a story about making sure I am neatly sorted into one box or another, but remembering that that sorting is God's work to do, and remembering as I lean on the writings of the Apostle Paul that we have been claimed, that there is no condemnation for us who are in Christ Jesus, then wouldn't it be a relief? Wouldn't it be a gift if at the end of all of this, whether the all of this is my life or the world or this age, what a relief it would be if at the end of all of this, there were messengers of God, angels, sent into the fields of each of our hearts to cut down everything that was sown by Jesus and to cut down everything that still kept springing up self-centeredness, selfishness, and cruelty in us, and sorted them all out so that finally, only that which is good could flourish. And everything in me that is twisted up and rotten and hurtful could be cast aside. And wouldn't it be beautiful? Wouldn't it be good? Wouldn't it be a relief if at the end of all this, whether it's the end of my life, whenever that comes, or the end of the age, wouldn't it be a relief if one of those weeds cut down from the field of my heart was every time someone has tried to sow in me anything less than a proclamation of my belovedness before God? Wouldn't it be beautiful to watch the angels moving from heart to heart of every child of God that has ever been told that something about them is wrong and wretched when it wasn't? What if we could see the angels moving from heart to heart, pulling up those weeds and throwing them aside and saying, soon this will be nothing but ash, and my child, you are going to know what it's like to be fully beloved by God without anything holding you back. wouldn't it be beautiful? Wouldn't it be good? Wouldn't it be true? That then we might all be shining like the sun in God's kingdom. Amen.